Let me explain to you why I think what we've been through the past 2.5 months here in the state. I think we have put our governor in a terrible, terrible, terrible position because the legislatures who defined these rails and set up this system for the governor to operate in, and I think we have done him wrong. And let me tell you what we've done. We've said to the governor, we in the legislative branch here, Governor, this is what we're going to do, and this is how you do it. All you got to do is say emergency 3 times and click your heels together, and we in the legislature are going to take a magic wand and wave it over your head. And we are going to endow you with the power to make law. And if you need a judicial branch to back you up, that's okay. We don't mind. Now you got the 2 branches of government. It's not supposed to have anything to do with making law. Then we said to the governor, this is what we want you to do next. We want you to segregate all the people and the businesses in this state into 2 piles. One pile we'll call useful people with useful businesses. The other pile are for useless people and useless businesses. Now, dear Lord, don't call it that, Governor. Use a benign word like essential and non-essential. And then when you get them separated, Governor, this is what you need to do next. You need to ensure that the useful people with useful businesses maintain most of their constitutional protection. So they can go about the way they need to go and do what they want to do and go to work and make a living. If they have a useful business that's big enough, you can peacefully assemble 100, 200, 300 people in there at one time. That's no problem. But the useless folks with the useless businesses, we want you to suspend their constitutional protection. And that way you can say to them, you shut your door, you go to the house, and you stay there till we tell you can come out. And the only time we're going to tell you to come out is if you want to go do business and spend your money at a useful business. The rest of the time you stay at the house. Draw your check. Oh, that check thing, it might be 2 or 3 months. The computer system's really backed up. Suck it up. It's for your own good. What a terrible position to put our governor in. And then we said, since we've retained constitutional protection for the useful folks and the useful businesses, we can't harass them with the police. But the useless businesses and the useless people, this is what you do. If those people get out of line, if there's 11 of them show up at a prayer meeting on a Wednesday night, the police come to the door and say, you conform and do what you're told, or you go to jail for 11 months and 29 days. How the heck did we get here? Now listen, anytime you use police power to enforce an executive fiat or decree, that is a form of fascism that this Constitution does not recognize and it does not tolerate. So at the end of the day, what does this amendment do? Well, it doesn't fix all this mess we created for the governor. We got to fix that so we never put him in that mess again. What this amendment does do is strips out the fascism out of the 3 most egregious constitutional areas. It says you cannot use law enforcement to enforce an edict out of the executive branch that denies people the ability to assemble peaceably, that gives them the right to go to work and earn a living, and that allows them to move around this state freely without the government infringing on them. And there you have it.
Okay. Wow. Any questions from the members? Yes, Representative Love, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative and Chairman Hulsey. So if we don't have law enforcement to enforce provision, who then would enforce the provisions of the executive orders?
Chairman?
Two opinions on that I want to talk about. There's 4 hurdles that you have to get over if you say we have to suspend the Constitution because we have a virus. Here's the first one. You can't tell Tennessee people, look, folks, the United States Constitution, the state of Tennessee's Constitution is the law of the land. Well, kind of, till you have a virus and somebody dies. You can't say that. Here's a second huge hurdle that you have to get over. And that says, I don't think it's constitutionally legal for the legislative branch in the state of Tennessee to cede to the governor the power to make law. I don't think we got a right constitutionally to do it. Clarence Thomas has been arguing that for years. Third big, huge hurdle is what all the framers said and what they believed. If you go read what they said, the men who signed the Declaration did not say, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor for public health. They never said that. They said for liberty. Patrick Henry didn't jump up and say, give me health or give me death. You know, the Revolutionary War wasn't fought over. King George deprived us of health and safety. Everything in that whole concept is all bound up in liberty and freedom. So you've got to get over that hurdle, and I'm getting to your question, but I have to preface it with this. The fourth hurdle that you got to get over is if you say we got to suspend the Constitution because we got a virus and people die, then you have to say that the greatest American value, the greatest American virtue is health and safety. That's not what the Constitution said. It says the greatest American value is what it's always been, and that's liberty and freedom. So, to answer your question, Tennessee people are not stupid. I think the governor can do everything he's always done without violating the Constitution. And that's not his fault, by the way. That's our fault. That's the rails we set up for him. If you tell Tennessee people, look, this virus can kill a bunch of you. Now, there's a whole bunch of you. It's not going to affect you. But there are some of you who can die from it. So if you don't want to die, then you need to do this, 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 and this. If you're an employee and you want to protect your employees, or you're an employee and you work in a business, you want to be protected, do this, 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 and this. If you are a business and you're going to let people come into your business and you want to protect them, do this, 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 and this. Tennessee people are not stupid. They'll do it. People don't want to lose their loved ones to a virus. I don't think you have to violate the Constitution and suspend constitutional principles to get Tennessee to practice safe health and avoid a virus.
Representative Love?
Thank you. And I wouldn't. Were you finished?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Go. No. So, if we don't get law enforcement to enforce the executive order, then are you suggesting that we just have the order and Tennesseans will abide by it just because the governor or the mayor says that we should do this?
Chairman?
Yes, sir. I'm saying you cannot use law enforcement to enforce an edict from the executive branch. Now, this bill does not deal with everything else. It just deals with these three egregious constitutional issues. The health department still has a venue. If you got somebody who has a business and there's sickness coming out of it and it's not right, we already have a statute in law to deal with that. But there is a due process system that goes with it. You have to have a hearing. This doesn't affect any of those things. It's just these three egregious constitutional areas.
Yes, Representative Love.
My only concern is this, well, several, but one of them is this. We had Mayor of Nashville advise businesses downtown for the health and the safety. Because in the liberty and freedom piece, there's also life, life and liberty. And some of the owners said, we're not going to close until, and I thought we weren't Facebook Live in here. What happened to those rules? Are you just taking pictures? Gotcha. I'm just asking a question. I think it's great, though. Thank you. And then someone said that they weren't going to close until the governor said, right? And so that was my concern, like, who are they going to listen to? Is it going to be the mayor? It's going to be the governor? You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
It does, and I understand that. It's just with these three egregious issues, I do not believe that it's constitutional at all to strip that away from people.
Sure.
I think it's a form of fascism. Here's another thing, too, and I'll be quiet.
Continue.
I forgot it. I'm sorry. Go on.
Okay. Representative Love, back to you, sir.
No,
Any follow-up?
No, I just wanted to ask the question. I agree with what he's saying. I think the concern I had was so much has gone on with executive orders. I'll give you an example. There was so much confusion because you have 6 counties that have different rules because of the whole public health system, because their health departments are run differently in the funding and the running of them. So you had messages going from the governor's office that people in Nashville were concerned about because it didn't apply to them. Then you had some cities that split counties, right? You had, I think, Goodlettsville split between Davidson and Sumner. So part of the thing I think we had confusion about was whose executive orders, right, govern which areas and who's listening to which authority, which orders do they follow. And the frustration did set in because I had a lot of self-employed persons, to your point, who said, why aren't we essential, right? We are as essential as everybody else, and we have to close to maintain safety. So I appreciate you bringing it, and thank you for answering the questions.
This does
Chairman.
not prevent the governor from issuing any executive order at all. All it does is say that you cannot use police to enforce an executive order that deals with those 3 constitutional issues.
Any follow-up, Representative Love? If not, we are moving on to Representative Shaw. You are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've heard a lot said just in the last few minutes. I want to just take a moment because I think it's important to talk about the religious community here involved in this, because I heard you say something about Wednesday night prayer service. Well, first and foremost, I think there's been a mix-up because the church is totally separate and different from government. It's been said thousands of times, but people go to church, but you can't go to church. And let me tell you why. Because the church is in you. If you are a believer, a house of worship is one thing, but the church is in each individual. Now, to the governor's credit, what I heard him say was no more than 10 people gather for worship during the epidemic, if you have to, which I couldn't figure out because I couldn't figure out what 10 members to call and say come and tell the rest of them stay at home. So I thought it'd probably be best that we just all stay at home because, again, going to a house of worship is one thing, but the church is in us. So we can't go to church. Wherever we go, that's the church. If I'm a believer, the church is right here and right now. It's the same with you and everybody else. So government doesn't have any authority over the living organism of the church to tell us what to do and what not to do. But I think it is our wisdom and our faith in God and knowing what God can do and will do for us is whether we decide to tempt him or not. And I'll be very brief because I know nobody want to stay here all night, but when Jesus was in the wilderness, the devil was tempting him in the wilderness. The one thing he said was when the devil said, if you be the Son of God, jump off this steeple, the angels will take charge of you. When if anybody could have showed out, Jesus could have showed out. But he didn't. What he said was, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. So we closed our doors, and they are still closed at our church because of the wisdom that we have and the faith that we have in what God can do for us. We don't want to go out there and eat coronavirus germs just because we think the Lord will take care of us. We don't want to jump off a 30-story building because we think God will take charge. We just know it's wise because over 65% of our congregation is people with underlying issues. Mm-hmm. and subject to get the virus. So that's why we stayed at home. We didn't stay at home because of anything the governor said, because the governor and this legislative body has nothing whatsoever. They may think they do, but they haven't. And I can give you scriptures. And I'll be glad to sit down with you tomorrow anytime you want to and give you all you want. They have nothing whatsoever to do with the church. So I just want to clear that up since we're talking about this. Now, if somebody went because the governor said go, that's them and the governor. They serving the governor and not the master I serve. But anyway, thank you for what you're doing. I think I understand what you're doing. But please, let's not mix the church up in this.
Any follow-up with that, Chairman? If not, we've got another or two here that'd like to. Pardon? Okay. All right, Chairman Todd, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hulsey, I just applaud you for bringing this and for the clarity with which you presented this bill and this amendment, and also applaud you for your interest in looking out for the best interest of our governor, because you're exactly right. I felt the same concern this entire time that too much has been put on his shoulders that should have been on our shoulders. It's not in our Constitution, I don't believe, for him to bear this alone, anybody in that position. And also, as you have alluded to, it's not on the law enforcement shoulders to start interpreting what the Constitution is versus what laws are on the books. So I think this gives them some clarity, and I appreciate you bringing this, sir. Thank you.
Okay. And next we have Representative Beck. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Hulsey. Your passion is to be commended. But I guess my question goes to, what you're going toward is emergency powers, correct?
That's what we're dealing with, yes.
So, in case of a natural disaster, you are taking away the governor's powers to enforce a curfew or other police measures that may have to happen within 24 hours. How could we as a legislature come together and act as quickly as a governor could in case of a natural disaster and he has to implement emergency powers?
Your response, Chairman.
If you have to have emergency powers, that is no problem. We've got the ability, and the governor's got the ability to take the reins when you have that. The way we designed this program, I think, hurt him terribly. But if you're talking about martial law, an event that's big, that's a whole nother arena. If you're having a declared emergency in the state of Tennessee, the governor has every right to operate under emergency powers. But this amendment doesn't deal with any of that. It just says you cannot use law enforcement to enforce an executive fiat on those three issues.
Representative Powell, or excuse me, Representative Beck, sorry.
So you're saying that this would not affect the governor in a case of a natural disaster. I'm not talking about martial law now. I'm talking about a natural disaster, floods, earthquakes, something along those lines. He has to enforce a curfew. You have to use police powers to enforce a curfew, correct?
I guess so. I have no idea. If you're talking about a localized issue with a localized place and keep people out, I don't really know how that would play out.
But this would limit his powers for that, correct?
If you can't use police to enforce that, if it's these three issues, these constitutional issues, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, further question. Okay. Let's move to Representative Powell.
Just I guess a follow-up. So if there was a national emergency, the governor could not authorize police powers.
Chairman.
Not for these three issues, these constitutional issues, no. You could not enforce them with law enforcement.
Representative Powell.
I guess I've got several issues with this, but and I understand where you're coming from, I think, on this, but you know, one is a lot of businesses have certain codes and certain things they have to do, you know, in respect to how they maintain their facilities and health. And if they're not doing that, then that could potentially jeopardize the health of a lot of other people. And in a situation like we just went through, you're saying that you don't think the police should have any sort of jurisdiction to go in there and to shut that activity down?
If the police are acting under an existing code of law that we have already passed in this legislature that is a constitutional law, they've got every right to enforce it, I suspect, if it's in that bailiwick. But the legislature does not have the authority to make an unconstitutional law, and we don't have the authority to cede that to the governor to make unconstitutional law. You can't, those three areas right there are not hinged upon a disaster or a virus.
But an executive, if I could, Chairman.
Go, yes, please.
An executive order that the governor does is not a binding law. It's just an order that takes place because we might not be in session. We've given that power to the governor to make those decisions in a natural disaster, national emergency like we just experienced. Is that not correct?
Chairman?
We do, and executive orders, by the way, are with the executive branch. They're the whole purview that the governor's got on the executive branch. But we do allow him to make those decisions under emergency powers, but we don't allow him to make law. And we particularly don't allow, or should not allow, him to make law that strips away constitutional privilege.
Representative Powell.
One other thing here that, well, there's several different issues, but one thing that specifically I wanted to address is the situation we just went in. Fortunately, our numbers were not as high as other parts of the country. And if we had a situation where it's not Tennesseans, it's people coming from other parts of the country, other parts of the world to a place in Tennessee, and law enforcement wanted to shut that down or prevent those people from assembling or getting together, that might be from a hot spot or an area where you have high concentrations of a virus, or they might be there to cause problems. Wouldn't this law would, or this bill, if it was to pass, law enforcement could not go in and stop those different entities from entering the state and from doing activities that would endanger Tennesseans. Is that correct?
Chairman?
You can't forbid people to assemble peaceably. You can't even make law to deal with, if you read the Constitution, what it says. The First Amendment to the Constitution says Congress shall make no law. You can't make any law that deals with the forbidding of people to assemble peaceably.
But there's three provisions to this bill. One is requiring a private business entity to close. I see your second about assembling peacefully, but also restricting the freedom to travel. So in no way we could stop people coming into this state from hot spots or for whatever reason that want to come into the state. We could not use law enforcement. The governor could not direct law enforcement to keep those people out of our state if this was to come along.
I don't think you constitutionally can stop Tennessee people from the freedom of movement.
But the bill doesn't, it's not just a Tennessee.
That's a technical question that I cannot answer. I do not know about inbound people. Tennessee people, I don't think constitutionally at all. I think it is a violation of the Constitution to tell somebody they cannot move around this state freely.
Representative Powell.
Well, I think as written, this prevents law enforcement from keeping other people out of our state who might want to come here, who might be from hot spots or have other issues that jeopardize all Tennesseans when they come into our state.
I appreciate what you're saying. From a law enforcement perspective, and chiefs of police, the few that I have talked to, and the sheriffs, the few that I've talked to, they did not ever want to be put in this kind of position to enforce an unconstitutional position. They do not want it. And I think it's wrong for us to put them in that spot.
Okay.